The rain on the 31st night tasted like iron and ash. Lyra pressed her spine against the stone base of the pack gates, her fingers curled around the fraying edge of a wool blanket that had stopped being warm somewhere around night 12. The cold had become a kind of companion by now, settling into her joints the way an old dog settles into a corner it knows. Above her, the Silvercrest Pack's iron gate rose 12 feet high, each bar thick as her wrist, topped with wolf-head finials that stared down at her with hollow bronze eyes. She had memorized every groove in those wolf-heads. She could draw them in her sleep. She had been sleeping beneath them long enough. Her body was a catalogue of small failures. The blister on her left heel had opened and closed and opened again. Her ribs showed through her skin like piano keys. The scent glands at her throat, the ones that marked her unmistakably as Omega, had been rubbed raw against her collar, a strip of boiled leather she had worn since the age of 6, since the Ashwood Pack branded her with a number instead of a name. Omega 34. That was what the collar said, stamped into the leather in crooked numerals that someone had punched in with a nail and a rock. She was not from Silvercrest. She was from nowhere now. The Ashwood Pack had dissolved 8 months ago, when their alpha died, choking on a bone at his own feast table. No war, no betrayal, just a chicken bone and a man too proud to let anyone perform the Heimlich on an alpha. His pack scattered like sparks from a dead fire. The ranked wolves found new packs within weeks. The betas bartered their skills. But the Omegas, the ones without family ties or useful trades, drifted. Lyra had drifted here. She had chosen Silvercrest because of a memory. When she was 9, a Silvercrest trading party had passed through Ashwood, and one of their wolves, a tall female beta with red hair and a scar across her nose, had looked at Lyra scrubbing the courtyard stones and done something no visitor had ever done. She had set down a tangerine on the wall beside Lyra without saying a word, just placed it there and walked on. Lyra had eaten that tangerine so slowly it took her an hour, peeling each segment with her teeth, letting the juice run down her chin. She could still taste it now, if she pressed her tongue hard enough against the roof of her mouth. 12 years later, that tangerine was the closest thing to a compass she had. So she had walked to Silvercrest's territory, presented herself at the gate, and asked for entry. They had refused. Not cruelly at first. The gate captain, a thick-necked beta named Harrell, had looked at her collar, read the number, and shaken his head. "Pack's full," he said. "No room for strays. Try Northmoor." She had explained that Northmoor was 300 miles north, and she had no shoes. He had shrugged it. Harrell was not a cruel man. He simply did not think about her after he turned away, the same way you do not think about a stray cat after you close the window. That was the first night. The second night, a she-wolf from inside the gates had thrown a cup of cold tea over the wall. It hit Lyra's blanket, soaking the one dry corner. The she-wolf's laughter carried like breaking glass. By the 5th night, Lyra had become a spectacle. Pack members gathered at the gate in the mornings to stare at her, the way you stare at a peculiar bird that keeps flying into the same window. Some brought their children to see. "Look," one mother said. That is what happens to an Omega with no pack. The child, a boy of about 4, had stared at Lyra with enormous brown eyes, and then asked, very seriously, "Why doesn't she just come inside?" His mother had yanked him away without answering. By the 10th night, Lyra's presence had become an irritation. The she-wolf who had thrown the tea, whose name was Verena, began a campaign. Verena was beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful, with silver blonde hair and cheekbones that could cut paper, and she held the unofficial title of the Alpha King's Chosen. Not his mate, his chosen. The distinction mattered. She wore his favor, a silver chain around her throat, and she walked through Silvercrest as though the ground had been laid specifically for her feet. Verena stood at the gate on the 11th morning and spoke loudly enough for the gathered pack to hear. "The Omega is diseased," she said. "Smell her. That is the scent of blight. If the Alpha King knew she was here, he would have her removed." But the Alpha King didn't know. That was the thing about Silvercrest. The pack was so large, so sprawling across its mountain territory, that the Alpha King himself rarely visited the lower gates. He governed from the stone keep at the summit, a half-day's climb above the valley where the common wolves lived. His name was spoken like weather, like something that happened above you. Cael Draneth, the Winterborn King, Alpha of Alphas, who had held Silvercrest's borders against 3 rival packs and 2 rogue armies, and had never taken a mate despite being 31 years old and surrounded by willing candidates. The pack whispered about it. Some said his wolf was broken. Some said he had loved once and the woman had died. Some said he simply did not want anyone, that his wolf was so dominant it could not tolerate the vulnerability of a bond. Lyra did not think about the Alpha King. She thought about surviving until morning, and then surviving until the next morning, and the one after that, on the 15th night. Something changed. She woke to a sound she could not place, a low vibration in the ground beneath her, like a bass note played on an instrument too large to see. The hair on her arms lifted. Her Omega senses, dulled by hunger and cold, flickered awake like a pilot light catching. Something was moving on the other side of the gate. Something large. She pressed her eye to the gap between 2 iron bars. A wolf stood in the courtyard beyond, 40 feet away, motionless in the blue dark. It was the largest wolf she had ever seen. Its fur was black. Not the flat black of absence, but the deep black of a lake at midnight, with silver threading through the hackles like veins of ore in rock. Its eyes were pale, not blue, not grey, but the color of ice when it is so cold it stops being white and becomes something else entirely. The wolf was looking directly at her. Lyra stopped breathing. The wolf inhaled once, a long, deliberate pull of air through its muzzle, and then it made a sound. Not a growl, not a whine. Something between the two, a sound she had never heard a wolf make, like a question asked in a language older than words. Then it turned and disappeared into the darkness between the buildings, and the vibration in the ground went with it. Lyra pressed her forehead against the cold iron bars. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Her scent glands, the raw ones at her throat, were suddenly flooding, pumping out her Omega pheromones in a rush she could not control. The leather collar grew damp. She did not sleep the rest of that night. The wolf did not return the next night, or the one after. Lyra began to wonder if she had imagined it. Hunger did that. Cold did that. On the 17th night, she caught a fever. Her body, which had endured so much with such stubborn efficiency, finally began to fail. Her temperature climbed. Her vision swam. She lay beneath her soaked blanket and shivered so violently that her teeth chipped against each other, and she tasted blood in her mouth, copper and salt, and the rain kept falling. On the 18th morning, the boy with the brown eyes came back. He stood on the other side of the gate, his small fingers wrapped around the iron bars, and he said, "Lady, are you dying?" "No," Lyra whispered. "You look like you're dying," the boy said, with the brutal honesty of small children. "I'm just cold." He disappeared. 10 minutes later, he came back and pushed something through the bars. A bread roll, squashed and warm. He had been sitting on it, he explained seriously, to keep it warm for her. Lyra ate the bread roll. It tasted like salt and butter, and the faint ghost of a child's body heat. She cried while she ate it, not because she was sad, but because her body had forgotten what warmth tasted like. The boy's name was Phelan. He was 4. He came back the next day and the day after. He brought her things, a sock he had stolen from his mother's laundry, an apple with a bite already taken out of it because he wanted to make sure it was not poisoned, a drawing of a wolf that looked more like a potato with legs. He talked to her through the bars in his small, serious voice, telling her about his day, about the dog that lived behind the bakery, about how his father had been a warrior who died in the border skirmishes last winter, and his mother cried at night when she thought he was sleeping. On the 22nd night, Phelan asked Lyra to sing him a song. She did not know any songs. In Ashwood, Omegas were not taught songs. They were taught how to scrub floors quietly enough that they would not be noticed. But she hummed something, a melody without words that rose from some place inside her she did not know existed, a low, sweet sound that curled through the gate bars like smoke. Phelan fell asleep against the gate, his small cheek pressed to the iron. His mother found him there at dawn and screamed. That was the day Verena escalated. The rumor Verena spread was precise and surgical. The Omega outside the gates, she told anyone who would listen, was using dark pheromone manipulation on the pack's children. She was an Omega witch, the old kind, the kind that the ancient packs used to burn. She was luring children to the gate to feed on their warmth. Look at the evidence. A child sleeping against the gate. Unnatural. The accusation moved through Silvercrest like ink through water. By the 24th night, someone had thrown a stone at Lyra. It hit her shoulder and left a bruise the size and color of a plum. By the 25th night, someone had urinated on her blanket while she was away gathering water from the stream. By the 26th night, Harold the gate captain came out and stood over her and said, with something that might have been discomfort in his voice, "You should leave. They are going to hurt you." "Where would I go?" Lyra said. Harold rubbed the back of his neck. "Anywhere," he said. "Anywhere is better than this." But it was not true, and they both knew it. An Omega alone in the wild, in winter, with no pack scent, was prey. The rogue wolves would find her inside a week. The winter would find her faster. Here, at least, she had the gate at her back, and the stream 50 yards away, and the bread rolls Phelan smuggled through the bars. On the 27th night, Verena came to the gate herself. She stood on the inside, wrapped in a white fur cloak that made her look like something carved from moonlight. Her silver chain glinted at her throat. She looked down at Lyra through the bars with an expression that was almost clinical. "You are dying," Verena said. Her voice was not cruel in that moment. It was observational. "You have perhaps 4 days. 3, if the temperature drops again." Lyra looked up at her. She did not speak. "I could help you," Verena said. She crouched, bringing her face closer to the bars. Her perfume, jasmine, and something darker drifted through. "I could speak to the gate captain. Have you admitted? Given a place in the Omega quarters." "Why?" Lyra said. "Because I need you to do something for me." Verena's eyes were steady, calm, the color of lake water before a storm. When you are inside, you will go to the Alpha King's keep. You will find a way into his private quarters, and you will place this in his wine. She held up a small glass vial. The liquid inside was the color of honey. "It is not poison," Verena said. "It is a bonding accelerant. It will make his wolf believe I am his fated mate, his true mate. It will ease his resistance to marking me, that is all." Lyra stared at the vial. You will be warm, Verena said. Fed. Safe. All you have to do is pour. The silence between them stretched like a wire. Rain dripped from the gate finials and struck the stone between them. No, Lyra said. Verena's face did not change. She stood. She tucked the vial back into her cloak. Very well, she said. Then die quietly. You are upsetting the children. She walked away, her white fur disappearing into the dark, and for a single moment, just before she turned the corner, she paused. Her hand went to the silver chain at her throat, and she gripped it, hard, and her shoulders rose and fell once in what might have been a breath, or might have been something else entirely. Then she was gone. On the 29th night, Lyra could no longer sit up. She lay on her side beneath the gate, her knees drawn to her chest, her breath coming in short, shallow pulls. The fever had settled into her bones like a tenant who had no intention of leaving. She could feel her wolf inside her, the small, pale creature that lived behind her ribs, and it was curling up, tucking its nose under its tail, preparing for something final. Phelan came to the gate. He pushed a bread roll through the bars. Lyra could not lift her hand to take it. "Lady," Phelan said. His voice was very small. "Lady, please eat." She could not. The boy stood there for a long time, his fingers tight around the bars. Then he turned and ran. She heard his footsteps on the cobblestones, rapid and determined, growing fainter until they disappeared into the body of the pack. She closed her eyes. The 30th night came like all the others, cold and dark and indifferent. But something was different in the air, a vibration. That same low bass note she had felt 15 nights ago, the one that hummed in the ground and lifted the hair on her arms. It was back, closer, stronger, and there was a scent. Pine resin, wood smoke, cold stone after rain, and beneath it, something electrical, something that smelled the way lightning looks, sharp and alive and completely impossible. Lyra's eyes opened. Footsteps approached the gate. Not from outside, from inside. Heavy, deliberate, each one striking the cobblestones with the authority of a man who had never once in his life needed to hurry. The sound of wolves parting, moving out of the way, the soft shuffle of bodies pressing back against walls. Torches flared along the gatehouse. In their light, Lyra saw figures gathering, dozens of them. Pack members emerging from their homes in nightclothes and bare feet, their faces confused and frightened and reverent all at once, because the Alpha King was walking down the hill. She had never seen him. She had heard descriptions, rumors, the Pack's whispered mythology of their ruler. None of it prepared her. Kyle Dranith was not handsome the way Verena was beautiful. He was not carved or polished. He was built like something geological, like something the mountain had produced. Tall, wide across the shoulders, with dark hair that fell past his jaw and a face that looked like it had been designed for exactly one expression, and that expression was authority. A scar ran from his left temple to the hinge of his jaw, pale against tanned skin. His eyes were the same impossible ice pale she remembered from the wolf. He wore no crown. He did not need one. He walked to the gate. The crowd fell silent with the totality of a held breath. Behind him, visible now in the torchlight, was Phelan. The boy was riding on the hip of a massive beta guard, his brown eyes wide, his small hand pointing through the crowd toward the gate, toward Lyra. "She is there," Phelan said. "The lady is there. She would not eat the bread." The Alpha King reached the gate. He looked down. Lyra looked up. The moment their eyes met, Lyra's wolf surged, not gently, not gradually, but violently, like a creature that had been chained underwater and suddenly breached the surface. Every scent gland on her body ignited. Her throat, her wrists, behind her ears, the hollows of her collarbones, all of them pulsing out her omega scent in a wave so powerful that the wolves nearest the gate physically stepped back. Cael Dranith went rigid. His pupils blew wide, swallowing the pale ice of his irises until his eyes were nearly black. A sound tore from his chest, not a word, not a growl, but that same impossible sound she had heard from the wolf on the 15th night, that question asked, in a language older than words. His hands came up and gripped the gate bars, and the iron groaned. "Open the gate," he said. His voice was low and absolute, and it did not sound like a request. Harrell, the gate captain, stood frozen. "My king, the Omega is not registered. She has no pack affiliation. The council has not approved." Cael Dranith turned his head. The motion was slow, precise, the way a predator turns toward something that has made the mistake of existing too loudly. I said, "Open the gate." Harrell opened the gate. The iron bars swung inward with a sound like a cathedral door, and the Alpha King of Silvercrest stepped through, into the rain, and dropped to one knee in the mud beside a dying Omega, who wore a collar stamped with a number instead of a name. He reached for the collar. His fingers found the buckle. The leather was stiff with rain and age, and it resisted, and he did not fumble with it. He simply closed his fist and pulled, and the leather snapped, and the collar fell into the mud in 2 pieces. "What is your name?" he said. "Not the number." "Your name." "Lyra," she whispered. Something shifted behind his eyes. His wolf, she realized. She could see it in the way his pupils pulsed, in the slight tremor of his jaw, in the way his nostrils flared as he breathed her in. His wolf was fighting him, pushing forward, demanding. He took off his coat. It was heavy, lined with dark fur, and it smelled overwhelmingly of him, pine and smoke and lightning, and when he wrapped it around her, her wolf made a sound inside her chest that she had never heard it make before. A low, shuddering purr. He lifted her. She weighed nothing. She knew she weighed nothing because his arms did not strain, did not adjust, simply gathered her against his chest as though she were made of paper. The crowd watched. No one spoke. Verena was there. Lyra saw her, standing at the edge of the torchlight, the white fur cloak bright against the dark bodies around her. Her face was perfectly composed, but her hand, the one gripping the silver chain at her throat, had gone white at the knuckles. Cael Dranith carried Lyra through the gate, through the crowd, and he did not look at anyone. He walked with the same unhurried authority he had arrived with, each step deliberate, his arms tight around the Omega, who had slept outside his gates for 30 nights, while he sat in his stone keep and did not know she existed. But that was not entirely true. Because on the 15th night he had come down in his wolf form. He had scented her through the bars. His wolf had known then, had screamed at him with every ancient instinct coded into their shared blood. And he had turned away. He had climbed back up the hill to his keep and sat in the dark and pressed his fists against his temples and told his wolf no. Because the last time he had let himself want someone, she had been killed by an assassin meant for him. A blade in the night. Blood on white sheets. Her name had been Sarah, and she had smelled like clover, and he had buried her with his own hands in frozen ground, and he had sworn on her grave that he would never bond again. For 15 days, his wolf had howled. On the 30th night, a 4-year-old boy had walked into his war room, past 6 guards, past his beta commander, past his advisor, had walked directly up to the Alpha King of Silvercrest and said, "There is a lady at the gate, and she will not eat the bread. And I think she's going to die, and someone should do something. The 6 guards had moved to intercept the child. Kyle had raised one hand, and they stopped. He had looked at the boy. The boy had looked back with the unblinking certainty of someone who had not yet learned to be afraid of authority. "What bread?" Kyle had said. "I gave her bread," the boy said. "Every day. She always ate it. Today she didn't eat it. Her eyes are wrong." Kyle had stood. His chair had scraped back against stone. His wolf, which had been thrashing behind his ribs for 15 days, went suddenly still, the way a hunting dog goes still when it catches a scent. He had walked down the mountain in the rain. Now he carried her up it. The keep was warm. That was the first thing Lyra registered, when consciousness returned to her in fragments, like a puzzle assembling itself in wrong order. Warmth. Then softness. Sheets. Actual sheets. Not wool or bare stone. Then smell. Cedarwood and beeswax and the lingering ghost of pine and smoke. Then sound. A fire cracking in a grate. The wind pushing against window panes. And somewhere, far away, the low murmur of voices arguing. She opened her eyes. The room was large and sparse. Stone walls, dark wood beams, a fireplace tall enough for her to stand inside. The bed she lay in was enormous, clearly built for someone twice her size, and the blankets piled over her were heavy enough that she felt pinned rather than covered. On the table beside her, a clay bowl of broth sat steaming. A heel of bread, a cup of water. She drank the water first, then the broth. Then she ate the bread so fast she choked on it and had to cough for 30 seconds before she could breathe again. The door opened. Kyle Dranith did not enter quietly. He entered the way he did everything, with a physicality that made the room feel smaller. He wore no coat now, just a black linen shirt, with the sleeves pushed to his elbows, and she could see the cords of muscle in his forearms, the scars on his knuckles, a tattoo on his inner wrist that she couldn't read from this distance. He stood just inside the door. He did not approach the bed. He looked at her with an expression she could not decode, something tight and controlled, like a man gripping a live wire and trying very hard not to show it. "How long?" he said. Lyra blinked. "How long what? How long were you outside my gate?" 30 nights. A muscle in his jaw flexed. He looked away, toward the fire, and she saw his hand close into a fist at his side. "I should have come sooner," he said. The words sounded like they had been dragged out of him, like they had cost something. "You came," Lyra said. He looked back at her. His eyes moved over her face, her throat where the collar had been, the raw skin the leather had left behind. She saw his nostrils flare. She saw the effort it took him not to cross the room. "My wolf," he said carefully, "knows what you are." Lyra's hands tightened on the blanket. "What am I?" "Mine." The word hit the air between them like a stone hitting water. Lyra felt it in her chest, in the place where her wolf lived, a vibration that resonated like a tuning fork pressed against bone. She said nothing. She did not know how to respond to being claimed by someone she had met while dying. "You do not have to accept it," Kyle said. His voice was even, controlled, but she could hear the fracture lines in it. "You are not obligated. The bond does not compel. It suggests, strongly." His jaw worked again. Lyra realized with a start that he was afraid. Not of her, of himself, of what his wolf would do if she said no. "I will give you rooms," he said. "Food, safety, whatever you need. You do not have to be near me. You do not have to—" "Stop," Lyra said. He stopped. She pushed herself upright in the bed. The room tilted, steadied. She was still weak, still hollowed out. But something in her was standing now. Something that had been lying down for a very long time. "You are the Alpha King," she said. "You do not ask permission." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "I do now." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something growing, something green and tentative, pushing up through frozen ground. Over the next days, Lyra healed. The pack healer, a gruff elderly beta named Maren, who smelled like camphor and boiled nettles, came twice daily to check her vitals, change her dressings, and mutter disapprovingly about the state of her body. "You are made of stubbornness and scar tissue," Maren told her on the third day. "Medically speaking, you should have died on night 20. Your wolf kept you alive past the point of reason." Kyle did not visit her room again. He sent food, he sent blankets, he sent, inexplicably, a book of star charts that she did not understand, but appreciated for the weight of it in her hands. But he didn't come. She could feel him, though. The bond, even uncompleted, hummed between them like a wire strung between two cans. She knew when he was awake. She knew when he was angry. She knew when his wolf pushed against his skin and he pushed back. What she did not know was that Verena had begun to move. The first sign came on Lyra's 4th day in the keep. A servant, a young Omega girl with wide, nervous eyes, brought Lyra her evening meal and then stood by the door, twisting her apron. "Please," she said, "you should be careful." "Of what?" Lyra said. "Lady Verena is telling the council that you used pheromone witchcraft on the Alpha King, that the bond is false. Manufactured. She says she has evidence." "What evidence?" The girl shook her head and fled. The evidence, Lyra would learn later, was the glass vial, the bonding accelerant that Verena had offered Lyra at the gate. Verena had taken it to the Pack Council and told them, with tears on her perfect face, that the Omega at the gate had shown it to her, had bragged about using it, had laughed and said the Alpha King would be hers by sunrise. It was a lie built on a frame of truth, and those were the hardest kind to break. The council summoned Kyle. Lyra was not supposed to know about the meeting, but the keep was old, and sound travelled through its stone corridors like water through pipes, and she heard the raised voices 3 floors below. She could not make out words, but she could feel Kyle's fury through the bond, a dark, hot pulse that made her vision blur at the edges. He came to her room that night. He did not knock. He opened the door and stood there, and his eyes were not ice anymore. They were something molten, something barely contained. "Did you drug me?" he said. "No. Did you use any substance, any compound, any—" "No." Lyra met his eyes. "I was dying outside your gate. I did not have the strength to lift a bread roll. When exactly was I supposed to manufacture a synthetic bond?" Something in his face cracked. Not broken. Released. The tension went out of his shoulders the way a bowstring loosens, and he leaned against the doorframe and pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead. "I know," he said. "I know you did not. My wolf knows. The bond is—" He stopped, exhaled. "The bond is the realest thing I have felt in 7 years." Lyra watched him. She watched the way his hand trembled against his face, the way his breathing was deliberately slow, like a man counting his way through a panic attack. This was the Alpha King of Silvercrest. This was the man whose name was spoken like weather. She got out of bed. Her legs shook, but they held. She crossed the room in bare feet, on cold stone, and she stopped 2 feet from him. She could smell him now. Pine resin, wood smoke, cold stone after rain, and beneath it all, the lightning smell, ozone and heat, and it was so overwhelming that her wolf pressed against her ribs and whined. She reached up and placed her hand flat against his chest. His heart slammed against her palm. Neither of them moved. Then his hand came up and covered hers, and his fingers closed around her wrist, and he made that sound again, the question in the language older than words. And this time she answered, not in words, in scent. Her omega pheromones bloomed from her throat, from her wrists, from the spaces behind her ears, a warm golden wave that said, yes and here, and stay. He pulled her against his chest, his arms locked around her. His face dropped to the crook of her neck, where her scent gland pulsed, and he breathed in so deeply she felt his ribs expand against hers. A sound came from him, something between a growl and a sob, and she felt his wolf surge against his skin, felt the heat of the partial shift, the roughening of his hands against her back. He did not mark her. Not yet. He held her until the trembling stopped, his and hers both, and then he pulled back and looked at her with those impossible eyes. Tomorrow, he said. The council convenes at dawn. Verena will present her case. You will need to be there. Lyra nodded. He hesitated. Then he reached into his pocket and withdrew something small, a tangerine. He placed it in her hand. The boy told me, he said. He said you once told him that the kindest thing anyone ever gave you was a tangerine. Lyra stared at the fruit in her hand. Her throat closed. Kyle turned and walked out. His footsteps echoed down the corridor, steady and deliberate, and she stood in the doorway holding a tangerine and listening until the sound of him disappeared. The council chamber was built into the mountain itself, a natural cavern expanded and shaped by generations of pack masons. Stone benches rose in tiers around a central floor, and the ceiling was high enough that the torchlight did not reach it, creating the impression that the chamber opened directly onto the night sky. It was cold. It smelled like tallow and damp rock, and the accumulated authority of 1,000 pack decisions. Lyra stood on the central floor. She wore borrowed clothes, a grey wool dress that hung on her diminished frame, boots that were a size too large. Her hair, unwashed for weeks and only roughly brushed this morning, hung past her shoulders. The raw marks from the collar were still visible on her throat. The council sat in their tiered seats. 12 wolves, betas, and high-ranking omegas, and 2 elderly alphas, watching with expressions that ranged from hostile curiosity to bland indifference. Kyle sat above them all, in a stone chair carved into the highest tier, and his face was unreadable. Verena stood on the opposite side of the floor. She was immaculate. White silk, silver chain, hair like a river of mercury. In her hand, the glass vial. She spoke clearly and well. She presented the vial. She described, with convincing detail, how the Omega had approached her through the gate bars and shown her the substance, boasting of its properties. She produced a witness, a beta servant who claimed to have seen Lyra handling a glass container on the 26th night. She was calm, measured, sympathetic. She was very, very good at this. When she finished, the council murmured. The eldest alpha, a woman named Thessa, whose white hair was braided with wolf teeth, turned to Lyra. "Speak," she said. Lyra looked at the council. She looked at Verena. She looked at the vial. "That vial is hers," Lyra said. "She offered it to me on the 27th night. She asked me to pour it in the Alpha King's wine." I refused. Verena's composure did not crack. "A lie," she said smoothly. "Why would I need to drug the Alpha King?" "I already wear his favor." A murmur from the council. Lyra continued. "I have no money. I have no possessions. I arrived at your gates with nothing except a blanket and a leather collar with a number on it. Where would I obtain a bonding accelerant? It is made from concentrated alpha pheromones distilled in blackthorn oil. The ingredients alone cost more than I have earned in my entire life. A pause. One of the beta counselors leaned forward. How do you know what it is made from? Because I was Ashwood Pack's compound mixer, Lyra said. Before I scrubbed floors, I mixed compounds in the apothecary. I know every substance in that vial by smell. Silence. The word apothecary moved through the council like a ripple. Open the vial, Lyra said. Let me identify its components by scent alone. Then ask Lady Verena to do the same. If she did not purchase it, if she knows nothing about it, she should not be able to tell you what is in it. Verena's left hand tightened around the vial. The motion was small, but Kyle saw it. From his stone chair, high above, his pale eyes tracked the flecks of her fingers, and his expression did not change, but something in the air shifted, a pressure drop, like the moment before a storm breaks. Open it, Thessa said. Verena opened the vial. She held it out. Lyra leaned forward and inhaled. Blackthorn oil, she said. Concentrated alpha pheromone, likely synthetic, extracted from shed winter fur. Valerian root for bioavailability. And something else. She inhaled again. Silver mint. From the Silvercrest greenhouse. You cannot buy silver mint. It only grows in this territory. Whoever made this compound had access to Silvercrest's private gardens. The council turned to Verena. Lady Verena, Thessa said, would you like to smell the vial and offer your assessment? Verena stood very still. The torchlight flickered across her face. For 3 seconds, perhaps 4, she was silent. And in that silence, Lyra saw something unexpected. Not guilt, not fear. Exhaustion. Deep, bottomless exhaustion, the kind that lives in the marrow. Verena's eyes, those lakewater eyes, went flat and dead, and for a single heartbeat, she looked like someone who had been performing for so long that she had forgotten there was a person underneath the performance. Then she straightened. She lifted her chin. I will not dignify this charade, she said, and she turned to walk out of the chamber. Verena. Kyle's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It arrived in the chamber the way gravity arrives, without argument. She stopped. He stood. The stone chair behind him was suddenly irrelevant. The chamber, the council, the tears, all of it shrank to background. He descended the steps slowly, each footfall a declaration. He reached the central floor. He stood between Lyra and Verena, and he looked at Verena, and when he spoke, his voice was the voice of an Alpha King addressing a member of his pack. You offered a rogue Omega, starving and dying outside my gates, a chance at survival in exchange for drugging me. When she refused, you fabricated evidence to have her expelled. You used a substance grown in my territory, purchased with access I granted you, to manufacture a bond that does not exist. He reached up and took the silver chain from around Verena's throat. The clasp parted easily. The chain pooled in his palm like liquid. My favor is withdrawn, he said. Verena's face contorted. For one moment, one raw, ugly moment, the performance fell completely away, and what was underneath was not villainy, it was desperation. She was 30 years old. She had positioned herself as the Alpha King's chosen for 6 years. She had built her entire identity, her status, her safety within the pack, on a bond that had never existed. She had been performing the role of future Luna so long that she had nothing else. You promised me, she whispered. You said I would be. I said you would be considered, Kyle said. I did not promise what I could not give. The silence that followed was terrible. Verena left the chamber. No one followed her. No one spoke to her. She walked out alone, and her white silk dress dragged against the stone floor, and the sound it made was like something being slowly torn. Kyle turned to the council. The Omega Lyra will be granted full pack membership, he said, effective immediately. She will answer to no one in this pack except me. That is my decision. It is not open for discussion. Thessa looked at him. She looked at Lyra. She looked at the space between them, where the bond hummed like a live wire. We do not discuss what is obvious, Thessa said, and the ghost of a smile crossed her weathered face. After the council dispersed, Kael and Lyra stood alone in the chamber. The torches burned low. Shadows pooled in the tiered seats like spilled ink. You were Ashwood's compound mixer, Kael said, until I was 12. Then the Alpha's daughter decided she wanted the apothecary for herself, so they moved me to floor work. Kael made a sound that was almost a laugh, dry and short. You identified 4 ingredients by scent from a cold sample. My pack healer could not do that. Lyra shrugged. I have a good nose. You have an extraordinary nose. He looked at her. Among other things, she felt the blush rise before she could stop it, heat climbing her neck, her cheeks, the tips of her ears. She turned away, embarrassed, and heard him take a single step closer. Lyra. She turned back. He was closer than she expected, close enough that his scent enveloped her, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his pale eyes, close enough that his body heat reached her skin through the grey wool dress. I will not rush this, he said. I will not claim you in a council chamber because political circumstances made it convenient. When I mark you, it will be because you want it, not because you have nowhere else to go. She stared at him. No one had ever offered her a choice before. Not about anything. What if I want it now? She said. His jaw tightened. His wolf surged behind his eyes, a flash of silver in those pale irises. His hand came up, hesitated, then settled against the side of her face. His thumb traced the raw skin where the collar had been, so gently she barely felt it. Then you will have it, he said, but not now. When you are strong, when you are fed, when you know me well enough to choose me, and not just choose survival. She leaned into his hand. His palm was warm and rough, and it smelled like cedar wood. All right, she whispered. 3 weeks passed. Lyra ate. She slept. She gained weight, filling back into her frame like water returning to a dried stream bed. Maren the healer clucked approvingly at her improving vitals and stopped muttering about organ failure. The borrowed grey dress was replaced by clothes that fit, simple things in dark blue and forest green, and she laced her boots tight each morning because the sensation of boots that fit was still a novelty. She explored the keep. She found the library, a room that smelled like dust and old binding glue, and she read for the first time in years, sitting cross-legged on the floor because the chairs felt too comfortable. She found the apothecary, a cluttered room full of jars and dried herbs, and a beta assistant named Thomas, who had never been formally trained, and was thrilled to discover that Lyra could identify plants he had mislabeled for 3 years. She found the kitchen, where a fierce Omega woman named Brecker ruled a team of 6 and allowed Lyra to sit in the corner and eat raw carrots while watching the organized chaos of meal preparation. She found Phelan. The boy was waiting for her outside the keep gates one morning, sitting on the ground with his legs straight out in front of him, eating an apple. "Lady," he said, "you look better. I feel better. Are you the Alpha King's mate now?" "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because he wants me to choose." Phelan considered this. "That is stupid," he said. "You should just choose." Lyra laughed. It was the first time she had laughed since arriving at Silvercrest. The sound surprised her. It felt rusty and strange in her throat, like a door opening after years of disuse, and Phelan grinned at her with apple juice on his chin. She began working in the apothecary. Thomas was grateful. The pack healer was astonished. Lyra's knowledge of compounds, distillations, and herbal medicine was extensive, the product of 6 years in Ashwood's apothecary, before she was cast down to floor work. She mixed poultices and fever draughts, and a burn salve that Maren tested on a warrior with second-degree burns and then demanded the recipe for in triplicate. Word spread. The Omega who had slept outside the gates was a healer, a compounder. She could identify 50 herbs by smell. She could mix antidotes for poisons that Silvercrest's own healer could not name. The pack's attitude shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small, specific ways. A warrior who had thrown a stone at her 3 weeks ago now nodded to her in the corridor. A she-wolf who had spat at the gate now brought her child to Lyra with a cough and asked, hesitantly, if there was something that might help. Brecker the kitchen Omega began saving the end cuts of meat for Lyra's lunch without being asked. Lyra noticed these changes the way you notice a season turning. Not by any single moment, but by the accumulation of moments. Kyle noticed too. He watched from his stone keep, from the high windows that overlooked the courtyard, and he saw Lyra crossing the grounds with a basket of dried lavender, or sitting with Phelan on the library steps, or standing in the apothecary doorway with her sleeves rolled up and her hand stained green with crushed sage, and his wolf pressed against his ribs and said, "Mine, mine, mine," with every beat of his pulse. He did not push. He kept his distance. He sent her a tangerine every morning, placed on the table outside her door, and she ate each one slowly, the way she had eaten the first one 12 years ago, peeling each segment with her teeth, letting the juice run down her chin. On the 16th day, Verena's final move came. Lyra was alone in the apothecary when the door opened, and 3 wolves entered. They were not Silvercrest. She knew it instantly, by their scent, iron and rotting pine, the smell of the Thornback pack, a brutal territory to the east, whose alpha had been looking for an excuse to challenge Silvercrest for years. The lead wolf was a massive alpha, with filed teeth and a brand on his neck. He smiled at Lyra with those filed teeth, and said, "The lady sends her regards." Lyra backed against the apothecary wall. Her hand found a jar of powdered foxglove on the shelf behind her. Toxic if inhaled. She gripped it, but there were 3 of them, and they were fast. They took her through the back passage, through a tunnel cut into the mountain that she had not known existed, and into the forest beyond the keep. The cold hit her like a wall. Snow had begun to fall, the first of winter, and the flakes caught in her hair and melted on her skin. The Thornback wolves moved quickly, dragging her between them. The lead wolf spoke into a radio, a clipped message in a language she did not understand. They were 30 minutes from the keep when the world changed. It started as a vibration, that bass note, that deep, impossible hum in the earth that she had felt twice before, once through the gate bars and once in the council chamber. But this time it was different. This time it was not a question. It was a promise. The forest went silent. The birds stopped. The wind stopped. The snow seemed to hang suspended in the air, each flake frozen in its path. Then the howl came. It rose from the mountain like something physical, a column of sound that shook the trees and rattled the stones and hit Lyra's chest like a defibrillator. The Thornback wolves froze. Their alpha looked up, and for the first time, his filed teeth smile disappeared, replaced by something older and more honest. Fear. The black wolf came through the trees like a landslide. He was larger than Lyra remembered, larger than any wolf she had seen, larger than seemed possible, his shoulders level with a man's chest, his jaws wide enough to close around a skull. His fur was that impossible deep black, silver-threaded, and his eyes burned ice-pale in the dark. He did not slow down. He hit the first thornback wolf mid-stride, and the impact sounded like a car crash, bones and momentum, and the wet crunch of a body meeting something it could not survive. The wolf went down and did not get up. The second wolf shifted, tried to meet the charge, and the Alpha King caught him by the throat and threw him into a tree trunk 20 feet away. The sound the tree made was louder than the sound the wolf made. The lead wolf, the one with the filed teeth, dropped Lyra and ran. The Alpha King let him run for exactly 4 seconds. Then he crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and brought him down with a single snap of his jaws around the wolf's hind leg. The Thornback Alpha screamed. It was not a dignified sound. Kyle shifted back. The transformation was violent and fast, the black fur receding, the bones reshaping, and then he was standing in the snow, naked and steaming and streaked with blood that was not his, and his eyes were still his wolf's eyes, ice-pale and absolutely feral. He knelt beside Lyra. His hands moved over her, checking for injury, and they were shaking. The Alpha King's hands were shaking. She reached up and took his face in her palms. His skin was furnace hot. His breathing was ragged. "I am here," she said. "I am not hurt. I am here." He leaned into her hands. His eyes closed. The feral light behind them dimmed, replaced by something raw and unguarded, something she realized he had not shown anyone in 7 years. She kissed him. His mouth was hot and tasted like copper and pine, and when she kissed him, his whole body shuddered, a tremor that ran from his jaw to his shoulders to his hands, and his arms came around her and crushed her against him, and the snow fell on them both. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead against hers. His breath was warm on her lips. "Choose me," he whispered. "I already did," she said. "On the 15th night, when you came to the gate as a wolf, I chose you then." He pulled back, looked at her. "You knew." "I knew." He closed his eyes. Something moved across his face, a grief and a gratitude tangled so tightly together they were indistinguishable. The claiming ceremony was held in the council chamber at midwinter. The entire pack attended. Every wolf in Silvercrest, from the highest-ranking beta to the youngest pup, filled the stone tiers until the chamber was warm with bodies and breath, and the collective hum of 500 wolves witnessing something that had not happened in 7 years. Lyra wore white, not silk, not like Verena's cold perfection, but wool, thick and warm and practical. Maren had woven sprigs of silvermint into her hair, and the scent of it filled the chamber and mixed with Lyra's own omega fragrance until the air itself felt alive. Kyle stood at the center of the floor. He wore black, as he always did, and the scar on his face was a pale line in the torchlight. When Lyra walked to him, the chamber fell silent. He did not speak. He did not need to. He tilted his head and bared his throat to her. A gasp moved through the pack. An Alpha King, baring his throat, showing submission to an Omega, to a woman who, 2 months ago, had been sleeping in the mud outside their gates. Lyra understood what it meant. It was not submission. It was trust. He was showing her, showing the entire pack, that his strength was not diminished by her presence. It was given purpose by it. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to the scent gland at his throat. She breathed him in. Pine resin, wood smoke, cold stone after rain, lightning. Then he marked her. His teeth found the curve of her neck where her scent gland pulsed, and the bond that had been humming between them for weeks ignited. It was not gentle. It was not quiet. It was like a dam breaking, like a river finding a channel it had been carved for, and Lyra felt it flood through her. felt her wolf rise and howl, felt his wolf answer, felt the two of them lock together in a pattern that was older than language. Her knees buckled. He caught her. He always caught her. When she opened her eyes, the pack was on its feet. 500 wolves standing, and the sound they made was not applause. It was a howl, a single sustained note that rose from 500 throats and filled the stone chamber and echoed up through the mountain and out into the winter night. In the back of the chamber, Phelan stood on his mother's hip and pumped his small fist in the air and shouted, "I told you so." Later that night, in the stone keep, in the enormous bed that no longer felt too large, Lyra lay against Kyle's chest and listened to his heartbeat. The bond pulsed between them with every beat, warm and steady, a rhythm she would never tire of. "Tell me about her," Lyra said. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Sarah." "Yes." She was. He stopped. Started again. She was afraid of thunderstorms. She would climb into my lap during storms and press her face against my chest and count my heartbeats until the thunder stopped. She said my heartbeat was louder than the sky. Lyra pressed closer to him. "She was killed because of me," he said, "because someone wanted to hurt me, and they knew the fastest way was through her. And they were right. Lyra felt the old wound in him, deep and calcified, a bone that had healed wrong. She did not try to fix it. She could not. You could not fix a grief like that. You could only sit beside it." She reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers. "I will not promise you safety," he said. "I cannot. This world does not allow it. But I will promise you this. I will never turn away from the gate again." She pressed her lips to his knuckles. The fire crackled in the grate. Snow tapped against the window panes. The wind moved through the mountain, through the keep, through the chamber where they lay, and it carried on it the faint green scent of silvermint and the fainter scent of tangerines. Lyra placed his hand against her stomach. He went still. His eyes found hers. She watched the realization move through him, watched it hit like a wave, watched the Alpha King of Silvercrest come utterly undone. His lips parted. No sound came out. His hand pressed flat against her belly, fingers spread wide, and the tremor that ran through him was not fear or grief or rage. It was something else, something he had forgotten how to feel. "When?" he said. "Maren says early summer," Lyra whispered. He pulled her against him, his face buried in her hair. He did not speak. He did not need to. Outside, the snow fell on Silvercrest. It fell on the stone keep and the tiered roofs and the winding paths, and the lower gate where a wool blanket still lay in the mud, where the iron bars still bore the faint scent of omega pheromones and bread rolls, and a small boy's unwavering certainty that someone should do something. The tangerine peel from that morning sat curled on the windowsill, drying in the heat of the fire, and the room smelled like citrus and cedar and the particular warmth of two wolves who had found each other through iron bars and 30 frozen nights. Lyra listened to Cale's heartbeat. She counted the beats the way Sarah once had. Not to drown out thunder, but to memorize the sound of something she intended to keep. His hand stayed on her stomach. Her wolf hummed. His wolf answered. The fire burned low. The snow kept falling. And somewhere in the keep, a 4-year-old boy slept soundly in his mother's arms, dreaming of bread rolls and potatoes with legs, certain in the way only children can be certain that he had done the right thing.